Hey guys, this is Akshay checking in from the editing booth. This is part two of our two-part preview on Georgia Tech football. This has all of the season preview and the schedule preview and all the conference preview stuff. So go ahead and enjoy. A quick recap of the schedule. You all know this, but we're just recapping it for you. Usually there's two cupcakes to start the season, and then we get into the bulk of the ACC schedule. That's all five, six other coastal teams. I don't even know how big this conference is
Six.
anymore. And then the cross divisional against Clemson, and then maybe sometimes Notre Dame occasionally, and then Athens at the end of the year, except last year because everything was weird last year. Occasionally, that Clemson game will be first up in 2019. It was the first game of the ACC network. That sucked. In 2020, it was I guess it wasn't any sort of release. It was just, it happened. It just sort of happened that way again. And then next year, it'll be, I think it's the Chick-fil-A kickoff game as part of the Mercedes-Benz agreement, I believe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, stuff happens. Tech football, historically, well, at least as long as we've been fans, has a lot of scheduling challenges because they lock themselves into effectively, well, in the modern reality of the ACC, they lock themselves into at least two borderline auto losses every year. Would you say?
I mean, you can't really do much about them, but
You
I would
let me
agree.
rephrase this a little bit more positively. Georgia Tech football locks itself because of its scheduling agreements, both with the ACC and in state. They lock themselves into playing two consistent college football playoff contenders. They are auto locked into that. Some years you get
Yes.
Miami on a rise. Some years you get this year you're going to get UNC on a rise, and you're going to get Notre Dame. That we've had Notre Dame the last 2 years.
Mhm.
So you have these situations where it's not just two consistent contenders, it's three and sometimes four. And you have
Yeah.
national talking heads, like I think this was covered on Split Zone Duo a couple of weeks ago, that look at that schedule and be like, who buddy? Who buddy? And especially when you're talking about a growing program, right? A program that's trying to retool, trying to rebuild. Um, Regardless of how sticky that kind of speech is, I think there is some merit to it. This kind of scheduling is difficult, right? It's a built-in challenge to try to overcome. I think we've talked about this kind of scheduling with basketball, where you schedule difficult and sort of play. You want to see the team play some of these tougher opponents and learn throughout the season. But at the end of the day, for a football season, there's only 12 games. Uh, so sometimes I think there's a discussion to be had over whether putting together schedules that in the future are going to include a potentially resurgent Ole Miss next year. Central Florida, take that for what you will. It depends on what Gus does this year. Alabama in like 2030. Some of these games, there's a discussion to be had about whether that is the right strategy moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing. I think in any given year, we probably play more legitimate or as many legitimate national championship contenders in football as we do basketball.
No,
And that's a
absolutely.
scare that is a scary thing to think about because like we say about basketball, you gotta take your lumps where you can get it. A quad one loss is a quad one loss. It doesn't sink your season. But in football, if you're penciling in Clemson, UGA
It's not even
as
pencil. It's
auto
at a certain
losses,
level, right? It's pen. I'm not gonna
yeah,
I'm not gonna be unrealistic about it. Like, it's pen. You're writing some of these things in pen.
we can dive into the nitty gritty of each specific team this year, but the more I look at the upcoming season, the less I'm telling the pessimist Georgia Tech fan in me to shut up. Because this is why they play the games. And we can, like I said, we'll dive into the nitty gritty of each team that we're facing, and some breakout players, and why this year is going to be different, or why it might be the same, quite frankly.
We can talk. We're getting there.
The moral of the story is we can talk all we want about how history, maybe we make choices differently over the last 60 odd years. Or we can talk about, hey, like the deck is stacked against us being who we are with our schedule and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the reason we all watch sports and pay attention, wow, I cannot speak, is because this is why you play the games, right? If in one of the more famous anecdotes, if Georgia Tech on a rainy day can take down a number 1 Alabama because that's Dodd's weather, like that's why you play the game, right? That kept Bama from a title. We threw away half of the 1927 season to explicitly ruin Georgia's season as well. Like wherever you go in sports history, and it doesn't even have to be just college football or just Georgia Tech college football, unexpected things can come from unexpected places. And to say that this year should be seen pessimistically, I think it is a farce. And then you don't enjoy the 12 games we're going to have. So
I feel personally attacked by that soliloquy.
You know what? We're just from the Rumble seat. We're all just haters, my guy. We're all just haters.
Are you claiming to not be part of the media establishment while simultaneously being the media establishment right here?
Exactly. I'm playing it both ways.
I'm playing both sides so that I always end up on top.
Exactly.
Terrible. All right, let's talk about some returning contributors and actually talk some ball. Right in front of me on my third computer screen, 1, 2, 3, I have some receiving EPA numbers provided to us by CFB Nate on Twitter. Do you want to talk about them?
Sure. I sure hope you know what you're going to say, because I don't even know where these numbers are at.
Cool, because I'm not showing them to you. Malachi Carter, we're talking advanced stats today, folks. Malachi Carter, in however many games he played, I think he appeared in all 8. I don't even remember how many.
10. We played 10.
Malachi Carter accumulated 27.9 expected points added. Adonicus Sanders with 20.8, Marquez Ezzard 9.1, and Peje Harris at 8.3. All 4 of those receivers, pure wide receivers, and I guess Peje Harris is a part-time tight end, all 4 of them are returning.
Mike, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, here's a problem. That is, and I haven't done the math, that puts us at around, let's round up and say 70-ish expected points added total from the receiving department. Here's the problem. Jalen Camp, who is now with the Jaguars, had 42 EPA, total EPA. Amarian Brown, who transferred to South Carolina, I think, South Carolina, yeah. South Florida, South Carolina, had 14.4. So you're talking about starting at about 70 from last season, and now you're at 10-ish, maybe even 5. I'm not doing math in my head right now. Here's the good news. Here's the great news. Kyrick McGowan, who's a transfer in from Northwestern, adds back 35.7. So you're looking, before you add some of the non-pure wide receivers, so this doesn't include Jahmyr Gibbs or anything. Before you add those numbers, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of like 45 total returning EPA, which is, I mean, considering what you've lost because of Jalen Camp in 2020, pretty good.
Do you know the meme where the lady's just looking at numbers flying past her face?
Yeah, the one where she has like trig identities floating around her.
Yeah, that's how I feel right now, because I don't know where you're getting these numbers. I don't know if they're right. I have no way to vet this.
Okay, hold on.
The
image is going in the document once I can copy it and paste it.
Because I love math and I love numbers, but I'm going to run off gut feel here and say that I've liked what I've seen from what we have left, and I don't think it's fair to say the cupboard is dry. And I think that a year of normal practices and a quarterback who isn't a true freshman, I don't know how much. Shame on me. I have 2 STEM degrees. Saying this, I don't know how much the numbers matter coming into this year.
Gasp, he said. I wish I had more numbers to share, actually, because I think from the Rumble seat this year, or at least this offseason, we've done a really good job of starting to integrate more numbers into our process, and that a lot of the credit for that goes to Robert Binion, who's been doing a really good job at writing a lot of advanced stats stuff. I talked a little bit about the receiving EPA, about the receiving core. I think the way another part of this that you touched on with your more vibesy mentality here was a quarterback that's not a true freshman anymore, and also that is working behind a retooled offensive line now, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of people would point at the major failing of the 2020 Georgia Tech offense and even the 2019 Georgia Tech offense as a offensive line that was bottom 5 at best in the FBS, right? And I'm not going to, sit and continue to shame for that fact, but that's the reality, right? That's what we're dealing with. And especially when you're working at a position where cohesiveness and timing and all that stuff is super important, that lack of consistent performances at those positions hurt. And so now you're looking at Jeff Sims, who's by eligibility a freshman because of the COVID year, but is a sophomore. His completion percentage over expectation, which we usually point to as a pretty consistent evaluator of quarterback quality. It was not super good last year. He ended up being at a minus 2.9%. So based on the passes that he threw, his completion percentage would be expected to be 2.9% better than what it actually was. And you can evaluate that at various lengths, but basically the national average for qualifying quarterbacks, like Robert mentions in his article, was about 2%. So you have basically what you're saying is Jeff is 4% under the national average at that, average quarterback performance, what we expect from an FBS quarterback. Where are we going from here? What does a full offseason, a non-COVID affected offseason, what does a full spring practice schedule, what does a full summer practice schedule, what does working on all of that timing and formations and having a lot of time to work on relationships with his other skill positions, what does that translate into on the field coming in next week or in 2 weeks? I think because this week is week 0. What does that look like? That is going to be one of the major questions that Tech is going to have to answer this year.
And I think that primes me for my vibesy take again. I think this is the perfect example of something that's more than the sum of its parts, right? So based on what we saw last year, based on what the numbers tell us in returning versus you can't quantify knowing the offense better. Mm-hmm. You can't quantify the extra reps, knowing how to take a hit, having a better line, like all of these things, at least in my, spirit club band kid kind of football experience, lead to something that, hey, maybe there should be reasonable expectations that are a little bit higher, just because, hey, we can already say, Vegas or whoever projects us at 4.5 wins based on what we already know about this team. But I think, quite frankly, that there's stuff that we don't, and that's where my, I guess, optimism or measured optimism is coming from.
Mm-hmm. I am trying to pull up the SP Plus rankings for this season. Let's see if I have to log in crap. Show me the rankings. I wanted to use them for educated analysis. Let me do the thing. Vamp really quick. Vamp. Continue to vamp.
I noted the Vegas line was originally 4.5. I believe that's trended up. Maybe people agree with me. Maybe people are trying to make money. At the same time, I think this is probably a great example of the positives of analytics, but at the same time, having a holistic view of sport. I don't know. That's why so much of media comes off the eye test at the same time, right? You want to hear what people are doing. I see you shaking your head. I can be that guy. We got everyone else.
I know exactly. Hold on. I know exactly what type of math you did for your master's degree. So I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear this anti-analytics screed. But to go further and dig myself into this numbers-based hole, Tech is currently, as of the preseason projections, a 62nd in SP plus. Over an average team, they'd be favored on a neutral field. They'd be favored by 4 points.
I believe that represents a pretty sizable drop from the February or January update that he did. Yes, I believe when I wrote
about a 20-ish place drop, I think.
Okay, what's the logic there?
I believe this drop is from last week. This incorporates all of the roster changes. Okay. So you have some transfers out of the program that happened over the course of the last couple months. A couple more transfers into the program. The recruiting class isn't going to affect this, but there's a couple other conference strength factors that also come into play here. In general, what Bill Connolly, friend of the program, is saying here is that Tech is expected to be a middle of the road team nationally, right? So I haven't looked. It's not an exciting thing to say. Right. It's not flashy, but the way that this, and you can game this out a little bit. I haven't actually done all of the plotting in terms of outcomes with SP plus ratings, but if you want to think about it like this, think of what you think a mediocre team, average, to put it nicely, an average team in FBS looks like. That's a 6-6 or a 5-7, right?
Yeah.
5-7 is what we've been talking about, where this team should be to show proof of concept in 2021, right?
Yeah. I think it's very understandable to see that and go, wow, that might translate to worse just because we are not playing an average schedule. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I also would add that being an average FBS team would probably be a step up from where we've been.
Yeah, no, I would agree for the most part, because you saw a lot of mistakes on the offensive end, and you saw a defense that had trouble generating a pass rush, and that lack of pass rush caused a lot of issues on the back end for the secondary. Right. That was in 2020. And you saw a little bit of that in 2021. Obviously, there's some progression, right? Between 2020 and 2021, there's obvious points of progression. The emergence of a quarterback. The offensive line was strengthened a little bit. There was a functional, a ineffective maybe, but a cohesive offense, an offensive game plan in 2020. But the pieces were there, right? The formulaic pieces were there. They just need to be refined. And you can kind of see that eke out in what Bill thinks some of the offensive defensive ranks will look like, right? He's looking at a top 60 defense for Georgia Tech. It ranked at 55, and then a top 80 sounds bad, but like now you're starting to get into the lower percentiles, but a 74th ranked offense. So he's saying, hey, the offense is going to grow again. It's still going to be better. The defense we are expecting, based on how they've played historically, or based on how they played last year, and based on who they have coming back, it should produce at a top 60 rate, a top half of the nation rate. And that's where Bill has had us for the last couple of years. 2019 aside, I think 2019 is a weird year in terms of how much turnover is going on. But that 55 number isn't too far away from what Tech started off the season at last year, and they ended in the 70 range. So you can clearly see that decrease, or at least that delta in terms of preseason and end of season results there.
Do you want me to do something expectationally irresponsible right now?
Fine.
Bobby Ross in 1987 went 2-9. In 1988, he went 3-8. In 1989, he went 7-4. I'm not saying that we need to be the Georgia Tech football of 1989, but if you look at that progression, that is far superior to not doing that, right? So you're saying this third year expectation, and we live in a modern football discourse where a lot of coaches are given the theoretical year zero, or I heard some people say about this specific case, a year -1, which I don't necessarily think is a reasonable thing to do.
It's not as bad as Kansas's year -4, but I'll give you the discourse here.
But at the same time, if you go further back, 1980, Bill Curry, 1-9-1. 1981, 1-10. 1982, 6-5. You're looking at a trend that is fairly reasonable to expect out of coaching transitions in the last 40 years. And you can look at other programs do the same thing. I just cherry picked these two for my notes here. In that third year, generally you need to expect some sort of step up, right, into that mediocre, medium, average, whatever word you want to put on it, realm of, hey, there's a process that is being executed here. And quite frankly, I do think that Jeff Sims is the answer and somebody you can build off. I think Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously, without a doubt, is a player that you can build off of, and a player that arguably we only saw 75%, in 75% of games.
He missed 3 games.
And at the same time, that is a Jahmyr Gibbs that doesn't know the offense like presumably he does now, right? So you're adding this process plus these players. I think the expectation of growth into a medium or even somewhere better if things really, really click, I think is a reasonable place to be at.
So Vegas knows more than we do, right?
Yep.
They set that win total at 4.5. Let's talk about this in terms of like a gut / heart versus brain thing. What does your gut say about that win total, and what does your brain say about that win total?
NIU, Kennesaw State, Duke need to, and we can expect them to be wins. Right?
Yeah.
So really, you're only pulling 1.5 more out of a hat, and that is between Boston College, Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh, Virginia. You got to believe that there's at least 2 wins in that pile of 4 games somewhere, and that gets you to 5. And then on top of that, you have the North Carolina, Miami, Notre Dame, UGA, and Clemson. It's really easy to look at those 5 games and go, you're not going to win any of them. But again, there's a lot of cracks at some giants here, right? Like, yes, you get UGA at home. Maybe that helps a little bit. Yeah, maybe Notre Dame lost something. Yeah, you're playing Clemson early week 3. Maybe there's something there. Miami, who knows with Miami? Like,
who knows what Miami will be at the end of the season?
They have not beat us in a legitimate contest since 2015. 2016 was a fluke. 2017 was a fluke. We beat them in 2018. We beat them in 2019, and we didn't play in 2020. You cannot tell me. Maybe you can argue, but
look, I was there when Tech fumbled on consecutive drives into the end zone. In 2016.
That was the first time my family visited Tech. They had a miserable time.
Woof. Trendsetter, as one may say.
Yeah, no, the Miami has not beat us in a legitimate game since 2015, and that was a fluke of a season, right? I don't think that you can just write Georgia Tech completely off in that game. I don't think that's responsible or fair to that team, to this team, right? And then, yeah, again, Notre Dame's on the road. That's a tough place to play, and we're going up there when it'll be cold. Like that. That's not great. But you're not playing Ian Book. You're not playing, frankly, a playoff team this year. Maybe they will, but they have to prove that, right? They've got as many questions as any playoff contender. So, yeah, 4 wins, I think, is the expectation at least. But I think there's a path to 6 or 7 if you win a game that you shouldn't, or maybe pick up 3 of those 4 question marks instead of 2 of the 4, or something like that. Because picking up, taking care of business, Duke, NIU, Kennesaw State, plus Virginia Tech, a lot of questions there. Virginia, definitely not a perfect team by any stretch of the imagination. And then Pittsburgh and Boston College. Pittsburgh is who we think they are. They are the definition.
They always have been.
They are who we think they are. Kenny Pickett is out there leading his 20th season of Pitt football on the field. His son's already waiting in the wings to take over next year. I don't know if that's definitely not true. Don't quote me on that. But we know as much about them as we know anyone. And the only reason that game was not a 1-score game is because of shenanigans that happened right at the end, and because of shenanigans that probably should have left us with a chance, had they not happened or been called the right way, should have left us with at least a chance to win as time expired in that game.
Woof.
Last year. And that was an objectively should be a worse Georgia Tech program than what we're seeing this year. I think, and yes, I did just talk myself into bowl eligibility here. I think that a 6-6 season is possible. Not probable, but possible.
Okay. Here's my bit, and I'm going to I'm going to be the antithesis to your expectations.
Good.
Or at least your optimism.
That's why there's 2 hosts, right?
No, there's 2 hosts because they pay me to put you on this program. Anyway, here's what I'm thinking. The gut, right, I think I have my actual opinions written down here reversed. My brain says under. Right, under 4.5, they'll sit at 4. 4 is enough to show progress. I think, given the schedule, I think 4 is enough to show progress than 3 and 9. I don't think that's. I think hitting expectations is the first step. Right. 5 is where my gut is at. My gut and my heart is at, because the way that I've been stringing this along for the offseason is there are 5 wins on that schedule, and you named 3 of them, right? The NIU, Kennesaw State, and Duke. You need to grab 2 out of a funhouse mirror Virginia Tech team that may not have a head coach by the time Tech plays them. UVA, Pitt, and Boston College. You can, even if you write off UNC and Miami, you still have 4 other teams in there that are winnable on paper games, regardless of shenanigans notwithstanding, right? They're winnable. I'm not saying that they will be won. They are winnable. They are within that 60 to 40 predictive win probability margin at the end of the day, on paper. That's where I'm coming at with this. There are 5 wins on the schedule if Tech wants to take them. And that's the drum that I've been beating across a variety of platforms this offseason. I really do think it's 6. I think you're going to have a hard time convincing me of 6. You're going to have some low post-game win expectancies there, but 5 is the sweet spot for me. 5 is where I'm comfortable saying, here is proof of concept. Let's go out and make a bowl next year. Let's go out and make a larger bowl the year after that. And let's start winning the Coastal the year after that. Or maybe those last 2 years. Let's compete against the UNCs and the Miamis for that top spot. But this year, if you have to show 5 in order for that in order to see that process sort of complete itself in the next 3 years. Right. I think with 4, you sort of see it, but it's a dimmer light. 5 is a pretty bright light moving forward.
This just came completely out of nowhere about us competing with the UNCs and Miamis of the world. We talk a lot about the perception of the ACC as like this weirdo hodgepodge mess, traditional powers down, yada, yada, Miami, Florida State, whatever. But in the narrative there, you completely sleep on when you only mention Florida State and Miami in this perception of the conference, that Pittsburgh has 7 or 8 national titles, that Virginia Tech was one of the best programs of the 2000s and part of the 1990s and part of the 2010s, and that Georgia Tech is the original football power in the South. So I think you can see that there's a path to, I guess, relevance or success for the conference. I think that requires North Carolina, Miami to stay on top, but also for the Georgia Techs, Virginia Techs, Pittsburghs, this other half of the coastal, really, along with Florida State, to kind of pick up the pace as well. So it should be interesting to see how that narrative shifts, if they can stay up and if Georgia Tech can be perceived as an ascendant power. Because you could always just run into the logjam that is, the Big Ten West or whatever.
Logjam, yes. Logjam is how I would describe that. Sure.
Let's go with that.
It's a logjam that either Wisconsin or Northwestern somehow wins.
Every year, without a doubt.
Every year, without a doubt. All right, I think we've been talking too much. Let's close out by talking a little bit more and outlooking, recapping, previewing, the Coastal and the Atlantic. We did the written previews for these. So here's what we're going to do. I assume you have the Atlantic or the Coastal preview opened up since you wrote that one.
I did write that, fun fact.
And I have the Atlantic preview pulled up. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go in order of projected finish and ask each other about each team. Okay?
Yeah.
Alternating. Okay. Let's start with the Coastal. Let's start with North Carolina. This is for you.
All right. Ask away.
I'm asking you how North Carolina is going to be doing. It's 10 p.m. on the East Coast, buddy.
Oh.
Come on. Oops. Not that late.
Well, we'll see. I think North Carolina is going to win the ACC Coastal simply because they've shown us more. They have the most proven quarterback commodity in the conference, let alone the division. That's Sam Howell. Their coach, for all the doubts that he was, couldn't do it, washed up, whatever, retread of 30 years ago. He's built a good staff around him. And quite frankly, that Orange Bowl game should have been a one-score game coming down to the end. So they've really been there and given good SEC program a run for their money. And they thrashed Miami last year. So, I don't really see – yes, you lose a lot of skill players. Yeah, you use Chaz, whatever his last
Surratt.
name. Yeah, Surratt. There we go. Thanks. But at the same time, I don't know what they actually did in Chapel Hill. Read between the lines there if you want. But, yeah, money. But, hey, the boys who live in the stadium that UGA completely ripped off to build Sanford Stadium, they're doing something right, and I don't see any reason for that to change.
Let's flip over to the Atlantic for my first pick, which was Clemson. If you think they won't win the Atlantic, you are hilariously wrong, and you might want to get your eyes checked. Clemson.
I have beachfront property for you on Memorial Drive if you do.
Beachfront property, oceanfront views in Omaha is my best way of putting it.
Yeah.
They could, I honestly think, and this is not a bit, well, it's mostly a bit, but I think they could play the second string for a good chunk of the conference season and still be in Charlotte at the end of the year. There's no way The only way that Clemson loses this division is if Florida State or NC State takes a major step forward. Boston College isn't going to do it. That defense isn't good enough. And we'll get to the other teams. But Florida State, I don't think, is there. NC State, even if they make a push, something is going to happen. It happens every year. Something happens to NC State. It's Clemson's division to lose.
Want a bold take on the NC State Clemson debate?
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay, fine. We'll get there.
Fine.
Miami's next on my list.
Go for it.
They have the talent to win the division. They
always do.
Starter. They recruit well, but De'Aaron King's coming off an ACL injury. They lost a decent amount of talent to the draft, but they do have that backfill in there. The problem is, for all of their talent, the last 17, 18 years of Miami football have just been a repeated story on them squandering talent. They've scored a grand total of 3 points in ACC championship games in a division they were designed in the early 2000s to dominate indefinitely. And until they do something, that's the difference here, I think, ultimately, is North Carolina has actually shown more than just that Miami gets that hype every year. I believe it was a top 10 matchup last year for Clemson. Was that team a top 10 team even when they were ranked in the top 10? I doubt it.
It's bad. Like the way that they do that. I was saying it while you were talking. Every year they have the talent to win this division every single year, and they just can't. I don't know how. They just can't.
Yep. But they do something. They lose to a Georgia Tech randomly, or a Duke, or
they get Pitt super weapons at the end of the year.
They get beat by FIU in the Miami Marlins Park.
Remains
in a game that existed for some reason. Which can we talk about how twisted that is for the Miami Hurricanes to play a game on the ghostly site of their former home stadium, the original Orange
and
Bowl,
lose,
and to FIU and all the Schnellenberger nonsense of FIU. There's just so many ghosts in that. I think you just saw off Coral Gables and let it crash into Nassau or something like that. That's the only way you could fix that program.
It's voodoo. There's so much voodoo right there. My next team is Florida State. They're not going to win the Atlantic, but I think Mackenzie Milton, I think there's been some questions about his injury status. If he's healthy and that offense clicks, that could be a thing right there.
The last time we saw him play, his leg had less structural support than a bowl of mac and cheese. I don't see how you can like when he left UCF, it was because he wasn't the number one quarterback option anymore. I don't get how plugging him into a Florida State team that was fundamentally flawed. I get that they can be better than last year, but
that offensive line, I'm told that offensive line should be a thing and not just philosophically existent this year. So hopefully he wears a lot of padding on that knee and he's okay.
Yeah.
Also, Mackenzie Milton should not be playing football. Look, that is my personal take. He should not be playing football. But I guess good on him for continuing to try.
I would like to add one more thing on Miami that I just remembered. Also, their home stadium's getting turned into an F1 track, so they got that going for them. Never mind.
That'll be a fun track for someone that doesn't watch F1 all that much. Tell me about Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh. I have them at third because I think they have a really, really high floor and a really, really low ceiling, and that ceiling being either randomly super weaponing Clemson, which I believe is still Clemson's last regular season home loss, is their 2016 Pitt showing.
I thought they got Cused. They got Cused in
No, that was on the road. Clemson does get Syracuse in the Carrier Dome on a Friday night.
Not called the Carrier Dome anymore. Is it actually still called the Carrier Dome? I thought they lost the sponsorship.
That'd be really ironic now that they finally have AC and lose that sponsorship. I don't know. Frankly, that just caught me completely off guard. But Pittsburgh, they have that low ceiling is either randomly beating Clemson in a fluky regular season game or getting the brakes beat off of them in a postseason game that actually matters. Like we said earlier, Narduzzi's been there for a hot minute now. So has their quarterback, Kenny Pickett. Yes, there's the meme that Pittsburgh always has that one random game every year, which, quite frankly, it is like an every other year-ish thing too, and that's just called playing the game of football. I think we ascribe these otherworldly super weapony powers onto Pitt that it's not fair to expect anything more than what we already know they're going to give us, and that is a roughly top 50-ish program.
All right, so let's look at where Pitt's offense is ranked to start the season. 72nd in SP Plus is much higher than where I thought they'd be. At one point last year, they were in the 100s. I think the season, like the week before they played Tech last year, they were in the 100s. So,
yeah, that ain't good, Chief.
Not a good. Kenny Pickett makes that offense, but he also makes that offense. If you get my drift there.
Yeah, I also have one more take on Pittsburgh.
Go for it.
I think that stupid handshake drama is the most important thing that's happened on a football field between these two teams since like John Heisman was coaching against Pop Warner for like unofficial national championships, simply because maybe that'll do something to get our fan base to freaking care about this game every year. Because it's like, that's the problem with playing in the ACC Coastal and like, oh, we're still living in 1980 as Tech fans where we played Tennessee and Vandy and Auburn and Bama, and those are the schools we care about, whatever. Like, the reality is we have Virginia Tech. Obviously, that's grown into a nice rivalry naturally over the years. We've played Duke after last year's shenanigans is now our longest played series, and nobody gives two shakes about them. The attendance numbers back it up. I double-checked that before I said this because I have it open now. Like there needs to be some sort of fire, and because you're not seeing Florida State every year, you're not seeing NC State every year, which seems like it would make perfect sense as like a rivalry. Because I don't know, it just seems like it makes sense.
NC State is an out-of-state embodiment of Atlanta sports, but continue.
Yes, but like outside of Miami, Virginia Tech, the Coastal's just not jazzing up Tech fans, and if this is what it takes, then bring on Pittsburgh. Like, look, start some random wrestling style beef about handshakes and disrespect and whatever, and maybe there'll be some sort of discourse for it.
God,
that has to be one of my worst takes ever.
Oh,
I stand by it. I stand by it.
Speaking of bad takes, you said you had a bit about NC State that you wanted to share.
Oh, yeah. And that is, even if they manage to somehow, some way upset Clemson and get themselves in like conversation to go to Charlotte, they're still going to blow it somewhere else. And Clemson's going to go anyways. Because that is the life of the NC State fan. They finally have the worst team in the conference tournament in baseball to play for an ACC title for the first time in 30 years. What do? They roll over and die and lose to Duke. You know, like that is the life of being an NC State fan. You're going to make NFL talent, you're going to get 9 wins, but you're never going to win the ones that matter. They're not going to beat North Carolina this year, and they're not going to beat Clemson this year. And if they do, they're going to blow it somewhere else.
I wrote in my preview for NC State how they won't win the Atlantic. Something will happen. Something always happens to NC State when they're at the threshold between good and great.
They do.
Something always happens. And I know if an NC State fan is listening to this, they was reading this when it was on the preview, they're nodding along. They're nodding along with a tear in their eye.
This is the only team in the ACC that I actively keep a misery index for. It's just so sad. Like
there's NC State and then there's Atlanta sports, and those are the only 2 active misery indexes that Jake keeps.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to keep moving because it's 10:15. We'll skip us. Virginia Tech.
Virginia Tech, for all the narrative that Virginia Tech hasn't done anything under Fuente, he's won the Coastal once, and has 3 seasons with at least 8 wins. That's pretty good. The numbers are pretty kind to him this year, especially their offense. But like, it just seems like the entire narrative has escaped Blacksburg. And that's a really dumb way to analyze a football program, narrative, blah, 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 whatever. But they're not recruiting in state like they used to. They're seeing a lot of transfers out of the program through faults of their own and not. Like, that is, there just doesn't seem to be any consistency. And quite frankly, like, they're not playing a Georgia Tech schedule or a South Carolina schedule in that, like, oh gosh, like Tech only won 3 games last year. Virginia Tech's not playing Clemson every year. They're not playing UGA every year. So like the expectations in terms of raw wins looks different and means something different for these programs. So I don't know. Virginia Tech just doesn't have it. Like there's no floor. Like we talk about Pitt having a high floor. Like Virginia Tech, it is just like the floor is lava. Where'd it go? Like we don't know what to think.
He could get fired either before they play. Is that game in Atlanta or in Blacksburg?
That is a great question. It is an odd year. So
but we didn't play last year.
Yes, because they play Atlanta and Boston College, or Georgia Tech and Boston College on the road in back-to-back weeks.
That is a really crappy road trip. But my point is that he could either be fired before they play that game in Atlanta, or he could be left on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson. And both are equally possible probabilities because that guy he might have to win the division and possibly win an ACC title to keep his job. Like
I did spend an hour and a half of my day listening to the basketball conference podcast in the background as I worked. And I will say, it seems like their fan base is very late years Paul Johnson on Justin Fuente. If you're picking up what I'm laying down, like that, like the 2 defenders and the 2 anti people. And like there's going to be, there's a schism at Virginia Tech, even outside of the actual like football playing facility.
Like that guy, the only reason Fuente still has a job is because, especially after his flirtations with Baylor after the 2019 season, is the boosters couldn't put together the money. That's the only possible reason I see for the fact that he still has a job. Like at any other school, they got an extension.
Didn't they just announce like a $500 million athletics fundraising thing? Oh my goodness.
Well, at least they're budgeting out his buyout that way. So
AI 2022, baby, let's go.
Woof. VT woof is all I got on that one.
Yeah.
Let's bounce back over to the Atlantic. Boston College. Reading some SP Plus numbers here. If I can find Boston College. They are 60th overall with the projected to be 60th overall with the 25th ranked offense. Good. Phil Jurkovic, good. I think he needs to make a couple of fewer mistakes. I think draftniks are looking at him curiously as draft season approaches next year. Get this, paired with the 103rd ranked defense. That is not good.
Woo!
So I don't know how that one is going to go, boss. They have underclassmen replacements that have had game experience for the guys that got drafted to the NFL, but they just lose so much.
Yeah.
They lose so much off of that. I think they also lost some on the offensive line. No. Their offensive line is still evolving because they've switched schemes from more power run to more spread. But they lost so much on the defensive side of the ball that I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on Boston College, but a lot of that is based on Jurkovic and the staff, and I don't know how much that translates to more of the trenches. So.
Tell me about Virginia, quick, because now we are quickly running out of time.
Virginia, I mean, I wish I could say more, but I don't think that they have quite they have some good like talent levels, but I don't think they have the dynamic kind of players that it would take to defeat an or UNC, sorry, or a Miami. So I don't know. Like we're getting towards the end here. I'm not gonna dither on forever about a program that I think doesn't have all that high of a ceiling this year.
I'm disappointed that you think Virginia will repeatedly pull the shenanigans that happened at the end of their game versus Abilene Christian last year out of their hat.
That was, again, another point. They needed all of that to beat Abilene Christian.
No, they were well ahead. They didn't need the shenanigans. It was just funny at the end. But they gave up a fumble touchdown in the end zone?
Yeah.
Something dumb like that.
To only win by 60 or something like that? It was.
Get on your horse, Mr. Grant. Get on your horse.
I'm sorry, I don't have the Virginia versus Abilene Christian demolition on the top of my head. But
okay, I'm going to make you do your Duke one to finish up so I can just finish mine out because I know your Duke one is very short.
Yeah. David Cutcliffe is in a weird, maybe he's coach for life based on getting them to lose an ACC championship game one time because that apparently is the best you can do at Duke football. I feel like this year is the only good thing that could come out of it is if they get Arch Manning, and I still don't see that happening.
He's got 2 years. They can get him to commit this year, but he would have to they'd have to wait it out.
And then he's got a coach for the 4 years of Arch and all that. Literally the only thing that Duke really has going for it is they kind of just randomly beguile a lot of teams in this conference under Cutcliffe, and maybe they pull a couple of those out, but the cupboard's pretty bare in Durham.
Also, the problem now is that with K gone in basketball after this year, you have a lot more eyes poking around that program looking at other pieces, right? They've had a lot of administrative turnover as well. So especially the AD, I think, is new. So
hypothetical for you.
Go for it.
Yeah. Akshay, if Duke basketball, for some reason after K, struggles or even recedes to a more mediocre stance, does Duke fall off the radar? Does Duke become Vandy, I guess is what I'm saying.
Potentially.
Or Vandy minus baseball.
Potentially, but think about the Duke media machine and how much effort. You would have to torpedo that program. Look,
yeah.
To make a soccer reference, Arsenal hasn't been relevant on the English Premier League table, in terms of actually winning trophies for the better part of a decade and a half. And they still get a bunch of media coverage. So I don't know. We are memeing our way into putting Duke in the top 25 just by law every season in terms of basketball. It would take an act of God to really knock them out of that race.
Fair. Just the thought I had sitting here.
Okay. I'm going to finish up because we are rapidly approaching the 2 hour mark. Wake Forest is fifth in the Atlantic for me. I don't know how that team is going to look. The claw fence is always effective. It's beguiling, like you said, for Duke for some teams, especially at the pace that they play at. But at this point,
old
everyone
this year too.
They're old. They've lost a couple pieces. Sam Hartman isn't Jamie Newman, so that's also a minus. He's good, but he's no Jamie Newman. And there's just way too many question marks, up and down that team. There's just way too many question marks for me to feel any sort of confident and picking them higher on this list. Louisville's next. The numbers don't agree with me on this one, especially because that offense before the preseason update for SB Plus was in the top 20 range because Malik Cunningham is a thing and he can do a lot of things with his legs and his arm. The problem is that he loses a ton of skill talent, including Tutu Atwell. It's unclear what is going to happen there. Also, Satterfield could get the can here during the season because of his flirtations with that South Carolina job. what is up with ACC coaches and especially mid-tier ACC coaches and flirting with other jobs? This is a thing. It's very weird.
This is if you look at where Louisville, I get that it wasn't under Satterfield in 2016, but was in a remarkably similar like narrative spot as Virginia Tech was 5 years ago, and in fact even better because they were a top 5 program, I believe, for a little bit there, and just the transformation in 5 years to gosh, this guy might not even make it to year 4 of being a coach there. Like that's pretty crazy.
I think this is year 2.
No, because he won a bowl game his first year.
Yeah, he did 9. Oh yeah, so this is year 3. Okay,
second real year.
Yeah.
That's where I get lost too. I still feel like it's year 2 for Collins, but yeah,
it might as well. Last in the Atlantic for me is Syracuse, buddy. That is I know Tech lost to them last year, and we can debate how that one happened all sorts of ways, but this is not a good football team. And I think Babers is kind of needs to figure out that running 4 verts and throwing the deep ball is not an actual offense anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Don't have a lot to add.
Okay. We are like I said, we're rapidly approaching the 2-hour mark. So that is all for a football preview. I will probably end up splitting this into 2 episodes. So if you're listening to this at the end of the 2nd episode, congrats.
The Georgia Tech history episode and the Georgia football history episode and the Georgia Tech football preview episode.
No regrets. Mr. Grant, do you have any other items to discuss before we sign off here?
Let's see if we are talking about From the Rumble Seat. If you do not follow us on Twitter, FTRS blog on Twitter, email us any questions to fromtherumbleseat@gmail.com. Our DMs tweeted us asking the mailbag. We love the mailbag. I love the mailbag. It's a lot of fun. By the time this comes out, you'll have another day to, ask questions there too. Give us a follow on Twitter as well. We'll have plenty to talk about as the season comes up. As you can see, we have plenty to say on Georgia Tech, the state of the conference, and any other bits and teams that come along. So buckle up. We got like 14 weeks of pure football season content coming to you from this, I guess, usually focused on other stuff podcast.
Right into the veins. It's it all starts this week.
It's good to be back. It's good to be back.
Clearly, we're all excited to be starting off our 2021 college football season with a taste of the Big 12 or Big 10, with Nebraska and Illinois kicking off the Week 0 slate.
I feel personally victimized here, given that I grew up an Illinois fan. So let's.
You might be able to watch Scott Frost get left at Memorial Stadium here. So.
He can take the Amtrak up to Chicago and then Amtrak out to Lincoln to get his stuff. Do they have
being train stationed a thing? Is being
I mean, either way, he's going to have to connect in Chicago. I think you can only fly to Chicago from Champaign, but sure, train station him like it's 1945.
Woof. All right, this is the end of part 2. I guess we'll see y'all after next week previewing the first game? ? I don't know.